May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Well, just like we did in Crosstalk this past week, we have a story that was divided up into two parts. In Crosstalk, we divided the story of the prodigal son, or the lost son, into the first part where he goes away, comes back, and the father says that they're going to have a party. And then the second half, which was the discussion with the older son, who is angry about that, and in the end comes to realize that he should join the party too. Last week we had the beginning of the story of Uriah, of David laying with his wife and then sending him away to be killed. And now we have the consequences for David. What David gets in return for doing this. God's forgiveness, in this case, does not come without a cost. And in fact, there really isn't full forgiveness here. At least not earthly forgiveness. David has chosen his path. And I think that's what's really important in this story, is not so much the wrong that was done and the consequences of that wrong, but the fact that when we choose our path, we choose what kind of life we will live. So David chose to use violence to solve the problem that he had created. And David lived the rest of his life with violence. The same holds true today. We see it all around the world, where countries, including this one, choose to use violence to solve problems. It doesn't stop violence. It just creates more. When we choose to live by the sword, we die by the sword. When we choose to live in love, that does not mean that bad things won't happen. But it means that where we are, what we hold in our hearts and what we share with the world is what we receive in return. A lot of the time, have any of you heard of something called a self-fulfilling prophecy? Only the kids probably haven't. When we expect something to happen, when that's what we hold in our heart, that's what will happen. I think of both Canada and the US right now in our governments, putting all of these things together to fight domestic terrorism. Terrorists, well, not domestic terrorists, terrorists from outside of Canada coming here and doing this. When we have people dying in poverty, people dying because of lack of health care, people dying because of the violence that we create within the country at far greater numbers than terrorism will ever cause in this continent. But we devote our energy outward, and we live in fear, or at least that's what the governments want us to do, because fear controls. And if we are afraid of something out there, how does that make us live? It makes us live believing that everyone is an enemy. It doesn't make us live in love. It doesn't help change the world into a better place. It makes it continue the same way over and over again. So how do we fix this? As we see in that reading from Samuel, David destroyed his whole life with violence. He plunged the nation of Israel into a long series of wars. Is that what we want for ourselves and for our children? Do we want them to grow up in constant fear? Or do we want them to grow up in love? In our gospel today, Jesus talks about how we join in God's work. And it's not by doing things. And he's really clear there. They ask, what can we do? What can we do to join in God's work? Well, there's one thing you can do. Believe. Believe in the one that God sent. And if we believe in the one that God sent, we have to listen to those words about how to live our lives. Not in fear. Not in violence. Not in setting those aside from us who we see as different or less. But in love. Particularly for those that are not like us. Those who call God by a different name. There is one God, as Paul says. Not many. There is one God. And just because they believe differently than us about that God, doesn't mean that we don't love them. We have to step away from our human nature, which drives us to think that somehow we are better. In some way, I am better than all of you. No. I am the same. I am created in the image of God. I am beloved of God, just as every one of you is. We have to set aside that need to protect ourselves. We have to risk being hurt. And we will get hurt, because not everybody will do this. But we have to live in hope, because the alternative is continuing down the same path that we've been going down for 2,000 years, and not allowing the kingdom of heaven to fully come to earth. In fact, pushing it further away. So today we remember what David did. God's anointed, the chosen king of Israel. God did many good things through him, but he chose a life of violence. And because of that, some of the good things that could have been done in his lifetime weren't. We can choose what kind of life we are going to live. And by our choices,